The morning I found out I was worth $63 million, I was standing in a lawyer's office in downtown Philadelphia wearing scrubs I hadn't changed out of since my shift ended 6 hours earlier. My hands smelled like antiseptic. There was a coffee stain on my sleeve, and a man in a gray suit was telling me that my Uncle Gerald, a man I'd seen maybe a dozen times in my entire life, had left me everything. Everything. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there thinking, how the hell am I going to keep this quiet? Because I knew, the second anyone in my family found out, everything would change. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I'm a registered nurse at Jefferson University Hospital, and up until that Tuesday morning in March, my biggest financial decision had been whether to pay off my credit card before or after I bought new tires for my car. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in South Philly with secondhand furniture and a radiator that clanked so loud every winter I slept with earplugs. I worked double shifts when I could get them. I ate a lot of pasta. Uncle Gerald was my father's older brother. He'd never married, never had kids, and had spent most of his adult life quietly building a real estate portfolio in Scottsdale, Arizona, that apparently nobody in our family knew the full size of. He and my father had a falling out before I was born. Something about their own father's estate. Something old and ugly that nobody ever explained to me in full, and so Gerald had existed in my life, only as a Christmas card and the occasional birthday check for $20 that stopped coming when I turned 18. The lawyer, Mr. Delaney, told me that Gerald had changed his will 14 months before he died. He'd hired a private investigator, apparently, to look into his nieces and nephews. All 6 of us. And at the end of that process, he'd left everything to me. Did he say why? I asked. Mr. Delaney slid a sealed envelope across the desk. He left this for you. I didn't open it there. I tucked it into my bag and drove home in a kind of fog, and when I finally sat down on my creaking second-hand couch and read Gerald's letter, I understood a little more. He said he'd watched from a distance. He said he liked that I'd chosen a profession that asked something of me every single day. He said he hoped the money would give me options, not just things. And at the bottom, in shaky handwriting that told me he'd written it when he was already sick, he wrote, "Don't let them pressure you, you'll know who I mean." I folded the letter and sat with it for a long time. Then I called no one. Mr. Delaney had already advised me to keep things quiet during the probate process. That was fine by me. I went back to work. I picked up a Thursday overnight. I acted like nothing had happened, because nothing in my daily life had actually changed yet, and because I needed time to think. The problem was my brother. My brother Marcus is 4 years older than me, 35, and he has spent his entire adult life being convinced that the universe owes him something. He's charming when he needs to be and completely insufferable when he isn't. He'd gone through 2 business ventures that failed, a divorce that cost him his house, and was currently living in a rented townhouse in New Jersey that our mother quietly helped him pay for each month. Marcus had always been our parents' favorite openly, unapologetically, in the way that some families just don't bother to hide. When we were kids, his sports equipment was always newer than mine. When we were teenagers, he got a car for his 16th birthday and I got a card. When I graduated nursing school, my parents came to the ceremony and left before the dinner because Marcus had a thing. I'm not bitter about it. I made peace with that version of my family years ago. I just knew with absolute certainty that if Marcus found out about Gerald's estate before I had any legal protections in place, something bad would happen. I told no one for 6 weeks. Then my mother called on a Sunday afternoon and told me that Marcus had heard something. She didn't say from whom. She just said, "Honey, your brother mentioned that Gerald may have left some money to family members, and he's just wondering if you've been in contact with the estate." My stomach dropped. "I've spoken with the lawyers," I said carefully. "It's all still being processed." "Of course," she said. And then, after a pause, "He's had a really hard year, Claire, you know that." There it was. Already. "I know, Mom. I'm just saying. Family takes care of family." I got off the phone and immediately called Mr. Delaney. Over the next 3 weeks, I did everything he advised. I set up a trust. I moved the liquid assets. I had documents prepared. I found a financial advisor through a referral from the hospital's legal department, a quiet woman named Patricia who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and had the energy of someone who had seen every possible version of family greed and was no longer surprised by any of it. "Do you have a primary residence yet?" she asked at our first meeting. "My apartment. Do you want one?" I thought about it, eventually. "Not yet. I want to be smart about this." She nodded like I'd said something that pleased her. Good. I kept working my shifts. I kept eating pasta, and I started to feel, cautiously, like maybe I could actually navigate this. Then I slipped on a wet floor in the hospital parking garage on a Thursday night in April, and I didn't get up. It wasn't dramatic. There was no crash of metal, no screaming. One moment I was walking to my car after a 10-hour shift, and the next I was on the ground with my right leg twisted underneath me at an angle that told me immediately something was very wrong. I'd hit my head on the concrete on the way down. I know because I remember the sound more than the pain. A hospital security guard found me 11 minutes later. I woke up in the hospital I worked in, which is a strange experience I don't recommend. I had a fractured tibia, a mild concussion, and a laceration on my left temple that needed 8 stitches. My supervisor came to check on me. 3 of my coworkers sent flowers. The orthopedic resident who treated me was a guy I'd handed instruments to in the ER 6 months earlier, and he was very professional about the whole thing except for one moment where he said, quietly, "You gave us a scare, Claire," and I could tell he meant it. I was in the hospital for 4 days. Then I was discharged to my apartment with crutches, a boot on my leg, and 6 weeks of leave ahead of me. Marcus did not call. My mother called once on the second day, briefly, to say she hoped I felt better, and to mention that Marcus was dealing with some things and hadn't been able to reach out yet. I said I understood. I didn't really, but I said it. My father called on day 4 and talked for 45 minutes about a documentary he'd been watching. He didn't ask about the injury beyond the first 2 minutes. On the 8th day of my recovery, I heard a key in my apartment door. I want to be very clear, I had not given anyone a key to my apartment. I had a spare, and it had been sitting in my kitchen drawer untouched for 2 years. My building has a front door that requires a code, and a second door that requires a key. Someone had gotten through both. The door opened, and Marcus walked in, and behind him was a woman I had never seen before. She was polished in the way that made me immediately suspicious, good blowout, expensive bag, the kind of casual blazer that costs $400 and is designed to look like it cost $40. She looked around my apartment with an expression that was almost too neutral, the expression of someone trained not to react. "Marcus," my voice came out flat. "What are you doing here? How did you get in?" "Mom had a spare," he said, and smiled at me like I'd said something silly. "We were worried about you." "Mom didn't have a spare." He waved his hand. "We came to check on you. This is Diane. She's a consultant I've been working with on a new project." Diane smiled. It was a good smile, practiced and warm. "I've heard so much about you," she said. "Nursing, right? That's such meaningful work." I looked at Marcus. "A consultant." "Yeah, I've been developing something really exciting actually. A wellness platform connecting people with in-home care resources. Given your background, I actually think you'd find it really interesting." He sat down on my couch without being invited. "I wanted to talk to you about it. We're in the early stages and looking at investors who understand the healthcare space." There it was, 8 days after I got out of the hospital. Crutches against the wall, stitches still in my temple. "Marcus," I said, "I have a concussion." "You're fine, you sound totally fine." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Just hear me out. 5 minutes." I spent the next hour listening to a pitch that was professionally assembled enough that I understood he'd paid someone to help him build it, and that at the center of it was a request for $250,000 in seed investment from me. He didn't say Gerald's money once. He said your resources and your position and family backing, but we both knew exactly what he was talking about. When he finished, I said, "I need to think about it." "Of course," he said, and stood up. "Take your time. We're just in the early window right now, so you know. Sooner is better." They left. I sat in my apartment with my leg propped on a pillow and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called Patricia. "He came to your apartment?" she said. "With a consultant. Appose, Claire. I know. You need to call Mr. Delaney today. And I want you to think carefully about whether you need to change the trust beneficiaries on anything that still lists family." I had already been thinking about that. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus texted me 4 times about the investment. Each message was slightly more urgent than the last. The 4th one said, "Claire, I need you to understand what an opportunity this is. Gerald would have wanted family to support family. That was always his thing." I read that one twice. Marcus had met Gerald maybe 3 times. I didn't respond. What I did instead, I called Mr. Delaney. I met with Patricia. I quietly contacted a real estate agent in a neighborhood I'd been researching for 3 months and made an offer on a house that I paid for entirely in cash through the trust, so that nothing was ever in my personal name. I changed the beneficiaries on everything that could be changed. And then I had a conversation with a locksmith about my apartment, even though I was planning to leave it, because I needed to feel like something in my immediate life was secure. The locksmith found marks on the lock that suggested someone had used a bump key. He showed me the scratches. He was matter-of-fact about it. I thanked him and sat in my freshly locked apartment and thought about how that made me feel. It made me feel like Gerald had been right. My mother called 2 days after the locksmith visit. She said Marcus was concerned that I was pulling away from the family. She said she didn't want things to get weird. She said, again, that it had been a hard year for him. Mom, I said, someone used a bump key to get into my apartment. Silence. I don't know what that means, she finally said. It means someone picked my lock. Someone who isn't me has been in my apartment. Claire, I'm sure there's an explanation. Did you give Marcus a key to my building? More silence, longer this time. He said you'd said it was fine, she said, quietly. I closed my eyes. I never said that, he said. Mom, I never said that. The conversation ended badly. Most of them did, for a while. My mother and I didn't speak for 3 weeks after that, which was painful in a specific way that I don't think I can explain to anyone who hasn't had a similar experience, the grief of realizing that someone who loves you has been choosing, over and over again, to believe the version of events that requires you to be wrong. I moved into my new house on a Tuesday in June. It's a gray craftsman bungalow in a quiet neighborhood outside the city, and it has a porch with morning light and a kitchen with a gas stove and a lock on every door that only I have a key to. I drove there alone with a car full of things I'd packed myself, and when I sat down on the floor of the empty living room and ate a sandwich, I cried a little, not from sadness, exactly, but from the release of something I'd been holding for a very long time. Patricia had connected me with a nonprofit that supports nursing education for first-generation students, and I'd quietly made a donation that covered 12 full scholarships. I hadn't told anyone. It didn't feel like something that needed an audience. I went back to work on a modified schedule once my leg healed, because I wanted to. Because it turns out that I love my job, and money didn't change that. It just changed my relationship to the word, have to. 3 months after I moved, I got a certified letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. It was a letter of intent to contest Gerald's will, filed on behalf of Marcus and, to my surprise, 2 of my cousins I barely knew. They were claiming that Gerald had been of unsound mind when he revised his will, and that I had exercised undue influence over him. I had met Gerald in person 4 times. The last time was at a cousin's wedding when I was 22. I had no idea how they planned to argue undue influence. I forwarded the letter to Mr. Delaney, and then I called Patricia, and then I sat on my porch in the morning light and thought about what Gerald had written. Don't let them pressure you, you'll know who I mean. He'd known. From a distance, through a private investigator's report, he had known exactly what would happen, and he'd chosen me anyway. The contest was filed. Mr. Delaney was not worried. He had documents. He had the original attorney who drafted Gerald's revised will, who had notes from every meeting and had, it turned out, conducted a formal capacity evaluation at Gerald's request, before the signing specifically because Gerald had anticipated this. Patricia had been through 3 similar challenges with other clients and walked me through exactly what to expect. The process took 7 months. I worked my shifts. I tended my garden, which I was bad at but trying. I had coffee on the porch in the mornings and watched the light change. I saw a therapist every 2 weeks, who helped me understand that I was allowed to grieve the family I had wanted and still protect myself from the family I actually had. Marcus and I did not speak during the contest. My mother and I spoke occasionally, carefully, in a way that had changed permanently. She came to my house once, in September, and walked through the rooms quietly, and when we sat on the porch she cried a little and said she was sorry. I believed her. I also understood that sorry was not the same as different, and so I kept my boundaries where they were. The contest was dismissed in December. Gerald's will stood in its entirety. Marcus's lawyers had found nothing because there was nothing to find. The capacity evaluation alone had taken the wind out of their entire argument. I got a text from Marcus the day the dismissal was filed. It said, "Fine, I hope you're happy." I thought about that for a while. And then, sitting in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and the December light coming through the window, I thought about the answer. I was, actually, Not in a triumphant way. Not in the way of someone who has beaten someone else. More in the quiet way of a person who has come through something difficult and arrived somewhere that feels like theirs. I had a job I was good at, and a house I loved, and a garden that was, against the odds, showing signs of surviving. I had Patricia and Mr. Delaney and my therapist, and a small, tight circle of people who knew the real version of the story. I had $63 million in a trust and a gas stove and a lock on every door. I didn't text Marcus back. There wasn't anything to say that would have helped either of us. Instead, I finished my coffee, got up, and drove to the hospital for my morning shift. At the nursing station, my coworker Jenna handed me a chart and said, "You look different lately." "Different how?" She tilted her head. "Lighter," she said, "like something stopped weighing on you." I took the chart. "Something did," I said, and went to see my first patient.